You're listening to stories written by Pat Stewart in her new book, Love Stories, available on Amazon. This week, son Tim will introduce Part 5, which is titled Exploring. You'll hear stories about exploring Italy, participating in the birth of a grandson, and the process of moving a regal home from its original site to a permanent location a few miles up the road. Right now, let's hear from Tim, and then we'll go on a road trip to Italy.
St. Paul wrote in his first letter to the Corinthians, "These three things continue forever: faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love." My mom taught me how important all three of these things are, with love in its many forms being the greatest. When I saw the love that my parents had for each other, for their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and many other blood relatives, for their neighbors, friends, co-workers, and even complete strangers, I always believed that it set the gold standard for how I should carry myself and my relationships with others. She wrote eloquently about the need to keep our Christian faith and love for all mankind relevant to today's society. And I'm so thankful that Mom and Dad too, of course, welcomed my wife Eden into our family just as if she were their own daughter and not a daughter-in-law. Mom gave us all the freedom to explore, to be ourselves, to make mistakes, including some really major screw-ups that we all went through. With 7 kids to deal with, all of whom, of course, knew what they needed much better than their parents ever could, there was no time for helicopter parenting. Mom gave us the opportunity to do the right thing, to learn, to grow, to experience life firsthand. If we chose to pursue another path, well, that was fine with her. She knew we would come around to see the light, and I believe that all 7 of us kids are better people for having learned through the school of hard knocks. She wrote about my love of adventure, exploring, of seeing new things. I was surprised and moved to see what she had written. I think one of the most profound loving experiences I had in my life was when I left the comfort and safety of my family to be a Peace Corps volunteer in a far-off land. It was difficult for me to leave, but it was also an adrenaline rush, a sense of adventure in pursuing a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I rarely thought of how it may cause my parents to be anxious for my well-being in a time and place that seemed fraught with the unknown and the dangerous. That is, until our own son left for the Peace Corps in Nepal many years later. When he was caught up in a disastrous earthquake and had to return home, I was so thankful for social media and instant worldwide communications, which did not exist when I was overseas. That put into perspective for me to realize that my parents had the same concerns, perhaps the same sleepless nights with communication lagging for days or even weeks. My parents came from a different generation where nothing was taken for granted, nothing went to waste, and Americans, for the most part, shared common goals of working together to take on global threats so that the rest of the world could live in the same peace and prosperity that we enjoy. I was impressed by the attention to detail in her writings. She specifically mentioned an incident in the Godspell piece that I had forgotten about, where we saw the play Godspell together in Greenville, and one of the cast called me out during the performance because we had worked together for the Greenville City Parks. This was in the mid to late 1970s. Mom definitely got her memory from her own mother, who often regaled me with stories of what I and my siblings had done over the past 50 years. I often think of one of my favorite photos of Mom. Dad took it on the ledge of one of the towers of Notre Dame Cathedral overlooking Paris. When the cathedral burned many years later, I thought of her picture in that tower, how Mom always endured for us through both good times and difficult times, and how, just like the cathedral, when times got tough and life seemed like a mess, well, it's time to sift through the ashes and get your act together and rebuild better than you were before. Thanks, Mom, for always being there for me when I needed the love and support that only a mother can give.
Part 5, The Stewart Invasion of Italy. Travel to Italy. What an opportunity. Romance, Italian food and wine. Tour the art center of the world. Isn't that everyone's dream? When I had the chance to travel to Italy, the trip did not include much romance. My husband Jack and I took our 7 children with us. We had already had our romance in the first 20 years of marriage. Now we were living with the results of all that romance, 4 sons and 3 daughters, 5 of whom were teenagers. At the time, our family was living in France, where Jack was in training for his new job. Living in France at company expense gave us the opportunity to travel to Italy with this gang of children. No other way could we have afforded a trip to Italy. It was August, the month all of France goes en vacances, on vacation, south to the Côte d'Azur, then out of the country to vacation spots in Italy and Spain. We hit the traffic jam heading south toward Cannes and Saint-Tropez. Our teenage sons looked forward to the topless beaches. Sorry, John, Tom, Tim, and Andy. This was a family trip, not college break. Our goal was to avoid the usual tourist spots. Jack's dream had been to visit Torino, where the Shroud of Turin resides. It is reportedly the burial shroud of Jesus. The shroud, however, was not high on the list of the children's agendas. What we did hit after Torino was Verona, the site of Romeo and Juliet. This gang of 9 traveled in a VW bus, bearing French license plates, carrying 5 English-speaking teenagers. We stopped at a picnic site in a public park with a watermelon to cool our thirst. This combination of teens speaking English in a German car with French license plates in Italy attracted the attention of a group of Italian teens. They came over to our table and started a conversation in Italian. We knew a little French and only the Italian phrases in our French-Italian book. One can't buy an English-Italian phrase book in Clermont-Ferrand, France. They were curious as to just what we were doing there. After trying French, the children settled on English and the phrase book. The international group had a great time eating watermelon and learning about each other's countries. It was amazing to us that these Italian teenagers spoke French, Portuguese, and English. It puts us Americans to shame that we were so bad in a second language. With the help of watermelon, the 2 sets of teenagers overcame the language barrier. Our family traveled to most of the European countries while we lived in France. Italy was my favorite. The people were so welcoming and willing to communicate with Americans who spoke English, very poor French, and no Italian. One lady worked with me for several minutes to help me buy something to drink. I quickly realized that Coca-Cola was a universal phrase to get something to drink. When the shopkeeper asked me, "Fresco?" my answer was yes. I thought Fresco would be as good as any other drink. What I didn't realize was that Fresco meant cold in Italian. It was not the name of a drink, but the lady shopkeeper was patient with me until I got my cold Coca-Cola. Another encounter was at lunchtime. Italian lunch breaks last until 4 o'clock, and these teenagers wouldn't last that long. At noon in Milan, we realized shops would be shut down until late afternoon. A customer in a small shop understood our dilemma and gestured for us to follow him. On his Vespa, he directed us through noon traffic to a supermarket that stayed open until 1300 hours. With little English spoken, he guided us to a place to buy bread, meat, cheese, and fruit for lunch. You wouldn't find that kind of assistance in most U.S. cities. Milano held another challenge for this family group. We were touring the city trying to find a place to eat the lunch we bought. By some unforeseen quirk, we were suddenly on a park sidewalk. Jack ended up driving down a flight of steps to get back onto the road. This is not recommended in any country, especially when one has teenagers who are just learning to drive. No one seemed to notice, and we ate our lunch in a quiet park in Milano. 20 years later, our children still joke about the time Dad drove down the steps in the park. Late in the afternoon, we finally found a hotel with space for all 9 of us. Dinner was the next activity. We found a tiny restaurant on an out-of-the-way street. By the time we were settled in the corner with a table and enough chairs, the scene was hectic. The older children ordered soft drinks, and I counted to be sure we had everyone. We didn't. 6-year-old Andy was not inside. "Isn't he with you?" We asked each other this question. "No, he's not with me," was the answer from all 6 children. By now, Mom and Dad were frantic. At age 6, Andy had a few French words but no Italian words in his vocabulary. We rushed outside as the waiters looked on, puzzled by these Americans. Andy was outside on the deserted sidewalk crying. "I didn't know where you guys were," he sobbed. In the confusion, we had hurried inside and left our baby outside. It all ended well when we got his drink and pizza, real Italian pizza. Does it seem like most of our adventures centered around food? They did. Bedtime in Italy was somewhat later than we were used to in the U.S. At midnight, the park below our hotel window was alive with people of all ages playing boccia, the game of balls on a court. Children were with parents, grandparents, and friends playing boccia in a city park. It was obviously a family gathering. What a wonderful scene of real family values. These are vivid memories I treasure from a trip to Italy so many years ago. The itinerary did not include the usual spots, Rome, Venice, or Florence. This was a practical, conscious choice. Travel with 7 children did not warrant these crowded, expensive places. We chose out-of-the-way places where we got to know the local people. We were enriched by the days we spent in Italy. We still remember Italy and its warm, welcoming citizenry as the most hospitable country we visited. I really believe that the year Pat spent in Europe with her family was one of the greatest highlights of her life. Next week, join us for Disaster Stock Tips, where she will share her secret of the hottest investing tips on the market. See you next week.